Hi everybody and welcome. We're trading cryptos using technical analysis. We're looking at news events and deciphering what's fundamental about them, what might have affected price recently, and of course how that might affect it in the future. All right, let's jump in. We're having a look at Bitcoin. We're looking at strategies we're looking to employ last week, and we're going to do a wrap up now and just see how we went and what we potentially might be looking for moving forward. All right, so we're looking at Bitcoin versus the US dollar. So you can see here there's these two black lines. All right, so we said it's finding resistance, or people are willing to potentially sell up around this sort of 1660 level, 600 level, and of course we're looking at buying support coming in around 12,000 or 12,100. Of course, it's a little bit more volatile, so it's potentially these levels you've got to keep a close eye on them. And we said down here is a good place to accumulate based on this trading range. And let's see how we went. So last week we looked at price. Down here is where we wanted to accumulate, and it moved straight back up to this resistance level. And the suggestion was keep an eye on it there. You might want to take some partial profits or put in a trailing stop loss, is what we talked about. So once price closed above this resistance level here, we'd be saying, right, let's move our break even right up to just underneath this level and look potentially for allowing it then to just continue to move higher, or if it comes back down, let's take profit and let's exit that particular trade. It's pretty simple. And of course, what did we see? We saw price go all the way back up and then it closed back inside. Very, very negative sign. Why is that? Because it's putting in these lower tops. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that sellers were willing to sell at, say, around 20,000. They were there lined up and selling. As a seller, what are you looking for? Well, you want to get the highest possible price if you're a seller. If you're a buyer, you're trying to get kind of the lowest possible price based on the condition. So in this case, the sellers have dropped their selling prices right down now to about sort of 17,000 compared to sort of 20. All right, so it's a very negative sign, and you see it stayed back in this range, and now it's heading back down again to the bottom of the range. So I'm looking for buying support like we had last time to come in there, and potentially we could continue trading this. It's very volatile, but that's the sort of logic I'm using. This thing is in an upward trend at the moment. It's in a sideways trend. It's putting in lower tops, so it's potentially even what we call an accumulation phase where it's just going sideways. So I'd be keeping a really close eye down around this sort of 12,000. If it starts to close below that, I really wouldn't be touching this with a barge pole. Okay, if you're trading on the futures instruments, on CFDs, etc., perfect opportunity. If it breaks below there, you could be looking at entering in potential sell trades. Okay, so keep your eyes peeled on this, especially if you're leveraged. Make sure you're using really logical stop loss scenarios and trailing stop loss scenarios. All right, so that's where we are with Bitcoin. Let's have a look also at we'll have a quick look at Bitcoin Cash, but as I mentioned last week, it's really not much going on here. I'm not excited to be a buyer or a seller in this because it's sort of tracking sideways, and it's very, very young. All right, but I will have a look at Bitcoin Gold. Bitcoin Gold tells an interesting story. We talked about this last week. We talked about how it was stuck in this range between about 420 and down around sort of $200. So between that sort of 400, 200 range, and you can see now it's down the bottom of this range. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the buying support to come back in, okay, and then it stays in this range. If it closes below here and then refuses to go back above, then that's where I'm looking at it saying, hey, this thing's negative. All right, this thing's heading south. All right, that is the pure basic strategies that we're employing. And of course, as I mentioned last week, I use a 15-minute chart to give me an idea of failures underneath support or holds above resistance, which I can show you just in a moment when we get to, say, Ethereum. All right, so that's the story I can see with Bitcoin, very much going sideways to a sort of negative outlook at this stage. What news events has come out to give us some indication as to what's happening? Well, let's have a look and see what Jamie Dimon this week. He came out, this is on Zero Hedge. So he's come out and sort of said, look, he apologizes basically for, he regrets calling Bitcoin a fraud. He's saying, look, it's not a fraud, and that potentially this blockchain is real, and you could have a crypto, yen, dollars, and stuff like that. It's almost like they're preparing us for digital currencies, but they're not sort of giving us too much information about how much they like Bitcoin. And remember, remember we talked about this with Karen Austin Fitz. I was showing you how Karen Austin Fitz was coming out last week and telling us how she thinks this whole thing is a psyop. She suggested that the future is going to be digital currencies, and what they're doing is getting people, all the best and the smartest in the world, to sort of create this whole digital currency platform, iron out the bugs, and of course then they'll smash it. And then people like Jamie Dimon will come along and say, hey, why don't you check out this new coin we're going to release that's very, very safe. All right, so it's interesting. We're starting to see that the seeds being planted. Have a look at what Goldman Sachs then joined in. So once Jamie Dimon comes out and says that he regrets calling it a fraud, now you've got people like Goldman Sachs who were recognizing how cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin could act as global money. All right, so this could be all shaping up. So then we had that gentleman who was coming out and suggesting Cliff High, who was saying it'll track sideways till about March, end of the first quarter potentially, or June, and then you'll get the next breakout to the upside. So at the moment, we've got the seeds being planted, and people are starting to agree with these stories, whereas before they were calling it a total fraud. Interesting. It's going to be interesting times ahead. The other Bitcoin story that I like the look of, this is actually in Australia out of the Financial Review, and it's this whole story about this Peter Thiel, who's a billionaire. He was involved in PayPal, and he's saying, look, I've made multi-million-dollar bets on these cryptocurrencies, etc. Interesting coming out from him, but remember, he's pretty liberal, and the truth is he made this bet or this investment a year ago. He didn't tell us a year ago. He's only telling us now, a year later, after I'm sure his bets have paid off really well, and maybe he's looking to be a seller. Well, that's according to Peter Schiff. All right, he's a bit suspect about this whole thing. The market reacted saying, wow, there's these billionaire fund managers, etc., into cryptocurrency. But the truth is they've told us a year later, so take from that what you will. The other big story from the Bitcoin side I'm looking at is as Bitcoin has now come off about 30% from its peak, and of course we're now getting a reason potentially China and South Korea are considering strangling the industry. Well, that's fairly negative news if you're looking for Bitcoin to just be ramping up, or all these cryptos to be ramping up, because remember, the top 3 participants that cryptos are being denominated in is yen, it is US dollars, and of course in South Korean's currency as well. So that's really interesting, because the reality is these people aren't worried about the future, really. People might say that. People are all saying, oh, it's the future of money, I'm investing in it. But if you're investing in it, you wouldn't be selling, all right? If you're trading it, or you're looking for big returns because your mate down the road is suddenly involved in it, then yes, that's when people start selling, when news like this comes out. So have a think about who the participants really are in this market, and if these South Korean people, if it starts to shut down the extra buyers coming in, all right, then you can see a lot of this selling pressure. All right, so let's go back and have a final look at some of the other cryptocurrencies. XRP, we talked about XRP last week, and we were talking about how you got to put a trailing stop loss in. We were saying, right, this thing, it's shooting up, you can't stop it. My words were, it's absolutely flying. But I was like, you've got to put a trailing stop in, and you've got to make sure that you take some profit out and you make some money. All right? Because this is what can happen. And guess what? This is what happened. So you're looking at around 330. It went up to a high, and it came all the way back down here to $1.60. That's like half. All right? That just halved. People kept saying to me, oh, you've missed the boat, it's going to $100. I heard all this $100, you don't understand. It may well be. But I was like, I'm not touching this XRP until I get a retracement and I start to form a base. And they're saying, oh, cryptos are different, it's not going to be like that. Well, it isn't different, and it's exactly like that. All right, trades like every other speculative biotech stock I've ever seen, the tech wreck, anything that's in a really strong, or what I call a mania, you're going to have a correction, you're going to have people taking profit, and you're going to have panic selling, and down it's come. So what am I looking for? Well, to be honest, I'd like to try and buy it down around here, around $1.20. Will it get there? I don't know. I'm going to look for it to form a base and start to make its next move up. All right. If it puts then in a lower top, very similar to what we saw with Bitcoin, mate, this thing could be, entering into a sideways pattern or potentially going lower. All right. So it's all about now being smart about your entry points. Okay. And as we move on now to Ethereum, so we've got some good news to finish off. All right, I know I'm sort of raving on, but last week we talked about how price was coming up to this previous high. I drew this line and said I don't want to buy into that. I don't want to buy into it. I want to see it go through there, come back down, test this level, and then we can buy in as it makes its next move up. Well, this is exactly what's happened here. I'm going to move this over now to a 15-minute chart just to show you very quickly at how I want to see it break through, come down, test, and then we want to accumulate as it starts to make its next move up. So let's do this. It's not going to be easy, so you're going to have to just bear with me a second. And just let all of this load. Okay, so what we saw here was exactly that happen. We saw a breakout above that resistance level. It came back down. It basically touched and the buyers said, well, I'm willing to pay more and hold above that resistance level. So I'm just going to keep moving it back here. And we'll get a really good idea of how we can trade with really low risk and high return using, obviously a high probability trade. So there's that black line. Price went up, it hit it. It fell back under it. It hit it. It fell back under it. Hit it. It was just trading. But look what's happening. You're getting these higher bottoms, meaning that the buyers are willing to pay more. That's what we're looking for in a move up. So it comes back up here. It fails back under. Higher bottom. Yes, higher bottom. And then finally you get this hold where it's above this black line. Look at that there, right there. Okay. So you've got this area here, break of the trend line, takes out these two tops, and it holds above that resistance level. So now that resistance level becomes support. The top becomes the bottom. That's what we were talking about looking for. Look at that. And you can enter right around this sort of level here. If you want, you could put a stop maybe somewhere under there, or even I would be looking around this level of support. Your risk is very low. I mean, you're looking at sort of an entry point around there, and then you're saying around sort of 887, and then you're looking to put a stop under 850. Very low risk. What's the return on it? Well, I don't want to show off, but we all know the return on this particular trade here. I'll put it back on the daily so we can see it. All right, finishing off, let's just have a look there. So using that trading technique, we'd be entering right around this sort of around this 870 level, and it went all the way up to around 14. Using a trailing stop loss that may have been triggered right now, depending on what your appetite was. But what a fantastic trading opportunity! So that one worked. We can tick that one off. Accumulating on your Bitcoin down at the bottom of the range levels, you can tick that one off. And of course, your XRP, hopefully people cash that in as that using their trailing stop loss and made some really good money. All right, let's look forward to opportunities for next week. Cheers, everybody.